All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Reza Razvani. I work on the outreach and engagement team at the Haas Center for Public Service. So in my role, I oversee the Cardinal Service Peer Advisors, as well as the Fraud Service Liaison Program. And today, we're going to have not a panel, but a presentation on Cardinal Service, the Haas Center, what it is, and what you can do to get involved. And what we have here today is we have 4 peer advisors, and they could wave at all of you. We have Kintashe, Adam, Chloe, and Gabby in the house. And we're going to have maybe a 10, 15, 20-minute presentation, and then we'll open up the floor to any questions you might have. So feel free to stay engaged or get engaged by popping questions in the chat. Unmute yourselves after the presentation and ask your question or make your comments. We're here to just support you and just share our resources and what we have to offer to all of you. In terms of housekeeping items, closed captioning is available. So if you look down at the Zoom bar, you'll see CC. If you click it, you'll be able to see the subtitles to this presentation. And this session, again, is recorded just for those who are not able to make it today. And let me see, in terms of other housekeeping items, that is it. So I'm going to popcorn introductions over in alphabetical order by first name to the peer advisors. We'll start with Adam. We'll go with Chloe, Gabby, and Kintashe. Adam, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Adam, and I'm a peer advisor at the Haas Center. And this year, I'm a junior, and I study civil environmental engineering. I'm the lead peer advisor this year, and really excited to be here today. So thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chloe Stoddard. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a senior, so I'll be graduating this spring. And I'm studying international relations and human rights. I don't know if I'm missing anything else. I'm originally from Wisconsin, and I've been involved mostly with gender justice work and workers' rights on campus in public service spaces.
Hey everyone, great to see you and congrats on getting into Stanford. My name is Gabby. I use she, her pronouns. Currently, I'm a sophomore, also one of the peer advisors. I'm studying international relations with minors in human rights and Spanish. And I guess the way that I got involved in public service on campus is through Cardinal Careers, which y'all will hear a little bit about more later, but I've been working there since my freshman year. Yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Tosh. I'm a senior studying human biology. My favorite place in the world is Lusaka, Zambia, where my grandparents live. And I got involved in service originally through the Fraud Service Liaison Program, then taking some Cardinal courses and doing environmental decision-making research.
Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to start, I'm going to share my screen right now so that we could get started. Give me 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. All right, so welcome. This is the virtual Haas Center for Public Service Hangout. We're going to be introducing Cardinal Service to all of you. And very briefly, public service is a big word. It's a big term, actually. And the way in which we define it is individual and collective actions that advance the public good. And there's a quote that Jane Stanford said over 100 years ago, where she said that a Stanford education is offered to students in the hope and trust that they will become thereby of greater service to the public. So in effect, it's not just about you doing X, Y, and Z, it's about how you can do good for not just for yourself, but for your community, for your country, and for the world. Next slide.
So I'm going to talk to you all a little bit about the 6 pathways of public service. These 6 pathways are how we at Stanford identify the different ways in which you can engage in public service. And you will encounter these pathways on campus, but also in your service off campus, and hopefully throughout your life as a public citizen. So if we go to the next slide, we can see the pathways broken down. So in the middle there, you'll see direct service, which might be the most familiar to you all. Those are things like helping out in a local garden or preparing food at a homeless shelter. But as you can see, there are also many other pathways that you can participate in service. Community organizing and activism allows you to influence your community on the importance of a cause, and policy and government allows you to engage in public service through politics and policy. If we go to the next slide, we'll see our last three pathways. Community engaged research and learning allows you to incorporate public service into your academics and your coursework. Corporate social entrepreneurship and corporate responsibility is where public service meets the private sector. And then finally, philanthropy is all about charitable donations. So I think that the beauty of these pathways is that they show us the diversity of public service opportunities at Stanford and throughout your life based on your skill set and your passions. And so I hope that throughout your time at Stanford, you'll have the opportunity to interact with a variety of these pathways. And all of us here have already throughout our time interacted with these pathways as well. If you have any specific questions at the end, we would love to answer them. And now I will pass it on to Adam to talk about the principles of public service.
Thanks, Tosh. So I'll touch on the principles of ethical and effective service really briefly here. So our principles of ethical and effective service are kind of a guiding framework for us when we're approaching our work in public service, community organizing, and community engagement, largely speaking. And they largely serve to, inform the ways that we're operating within space that, may not be our own, and think critically about the way that we are approaching our mindset and framing to the work that we're doing. And so this can inform our program design, our implementation and evaluation, as well as ensure that the work aligns with our values. So it's really a critical piece to engaging in the most effective way and being mindful of values in equity and ethics while we're working in our space.
So
Great.
very briefly, go ahead, Adam.
So I guess I can give a little bit of an overview on the 4 pillars of Cardinal service. Thanks, Reza. So the 4 pillars of Cardinal service offer a university-wide endeavor into looking into different pathways to exploring public service in a variety of ways. And so our 4 main pillars are Cardinal courses, which offer service learning opportunities through courses that you can get credit for at Stanford. Cardinal commitment, which is a long-term service commitment to an organization of your choosing or a club. Cardinal careers, which is largely post-grad opportunities for students interested in public service, and Cardinal Quarter, which offers fellowships and internships.
Yeah, so now I can do a little bit more of a deep dive into Cardinal Quarter experiences. So it's an opportunity for students to pursue a full-time summer or quarter-long public service experience with support from Stanford, and that comes in either like a grant or stipend, and also support from the larger Cardinal Quarter cohort and Haas Center staff. So you'll be able to like get training before you go on like how to make the most of your experience and also be trained on some of the ethics that Haas Center wants those who are participating in the programs that they are participating in to practice as well in their public service journey. So it's a great opportunity as well to integrate your academic learning with field-based experience. A lot of the peer advisors, including myself, have done Cardinal Quarters. I've done 2. And it was a great experience for me to pursue my passion for human rights law and gender justice. And they can be prearranged or self-designed, and they can be domestic and in international settings. They can also be, for example, with nonprofit organizations, the government, international organizations, etc. So there is a lot of flexibility with what you can do with your Cardinal Quarter. And I also want to emphasize that you can do it not during the summer. It is most popular to do during the summer because that's when people usually qualify in order to do it. And there's just a lot more funding opportunities. But I've had friends who have taken quarters off even before the pandemic when it's become more popular to do, to work abroad, for example, in Geneva to work on human rights. And there's over 500 opportunities offered each year through over 30 campus partners. So there's a lot of options. And also it's important to note that freshmen are encouraged to apply. It's not too early to do a Cardinal Quarter the summer after your freshman year, but a lot of people think that it is, but it truly isn't. And you're not underqualified to do so. So want to get that in your heads now if you're interested in doing it. And we can move on to the next slide. So also Cardinal courses are a really great way to get involved with public service at Stanford and a way to blend your academic interests with your public service journey. And there are over 200 courses that do this. And mainly how it works is that in class, you learn about a specific topic, and the class also works with a community partner that is aiming to address social and environmental issues. So for example, I have taken a couple of Cardinal courses, but one in particular that I really loved is through the Spanish department, and it was focused on immigration and citizenship. And so each week we would go to a local partner organization in Redwood City, and we would use our Spanish that we specifically learned for this partnership in order to help prepare community members for their citizenship exams. And there's also opportunities through these types of opportunities for student mentorship, as well as it's like a SILC, it's a community engaged learning coordinator. And I actually ended up doing that after the Cardinal course as well. So that's something exciting to note, that if you really liked the class, there's an opportunity for you to take a leadership role and being a facilitator and assistant to the class as well. And it's part of the transcript notation. So if you wanted to get a transcript notation for the public service journey and experiences that you've had, Cardinal courses are part of that. And yeah, there's also Haas and VPUE staff facilitators as well. And lastly, to note, there are different Cardinal courses in all of the different categories of identity, education, human rights, environment, health, and engineering. So there's something for everyone. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so delving into another pillar of Cardinal service, we come to Cardinal commitment, which is an opportunity for students of all years to make and sustain a significant service commitment as part of the Stanford experience. So like the slide says, there are three main components of a Cardinal commitment. You must declare your mission, engage in service, and certify your completion. So there are a wide variety of ways that you can fulfill a Cardinal commitment, whether through working with local courts and self-litigants, or working with SCOPE, which is a pre-med organization here on campus, to get clinical experience. There's just a lot of different ways in which you can engage in service, and as a part of the significant service commitment, that requires you to be engaged for at least 3 quarters. I don't believe that they have to start in the fall and end in the spring, but you do have to make sure that you are maintaining that commitment over that period of time. There are, like I mentioned, a bunch of student orgs as well as community organizations that the Haas Center has built a reputation and partnership with in order for you to really be able to accomplish community service work both on and off campus. And so you're able to really interact with your peers, especially those working within similar organizations to you, and really allow you to reflect on your positionality as someone engaging in service work, and how you're best serving the communities that you're part of. I was done. So with that section, but so moving on to Cardinal Careers. This is where I work at the Haas Center. And so through Cardinal Careers, students are able to explore service opportunities and other aspects of it, remaining engaged in service even after you graduate, and how to integrate service into a career. So they offer advising, and a lot of students don't engage in this advising until their junior or senior year, but I definitely encourage you to go as early as your freshman year. They can also help with resume editing, interviewing tips, and generally just how to integrate your passions with your academic and career goals. They also assist with fellowship processes such as the Truman Scholarship, and the post-grad fellowships that are offered. Chloe, one of our peer advisors, actually was awarded one of the post-grad fellowships, the John Gardner Fellowship for Public Service, which is super prestigious and very awesome opportunity. And there's also a lot of opportunities to network with various organizations through career fairs and other just general events. Like I mentioned, competitive fellowship programs, and there's a graduation pledge that students can make to commit to engaging in service even after they graduate. And the one last thing that isn't mentioned here, but I think is also a super valuable resource, is the newsletter, which students can sign up for, obviously once you are a student here at Stanford, and there's internship opportunities, job opportunities, fellowship opportunities, both on and off campus, for you to really get informed with the different ways that you can get involved in public service based on your interests.
Great. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or ask them out loud or raise your hand, and we're happy to answer them. Otherwise, great. Jasmine, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious, like when you see your course list, does two questions, there'll be a follow-up, but do you see it listed as something that's like community service certified or something, like you said, like you were describing, like with Cardinal courses related to community service? Do those courses get listed and have that label on them?
Oh, sorry, Adam. I'll be really quick.
Go ahead.
So I'm taking the class that Chloe mentioned about immigration and citizenship this quarter. And so for a lot of Cardinal courses, they have a notation that would suggest that you're doing service learning. Like, for example, the course code is SpanLang 13SL, which stands for obviously service learning. But there are other ways that Stanford can denote that you are engaging in service, typically in the title of the course, because both the course code and the title of the course appear on your transcript. But yeah, I mean, I think generally that Stanford has a really interesting notation when it comes to courses that generally allow you to understand what courses are involved in service, but also a lot of courses are cross-listed, so it may get lost in translation depending on what you enroll in.
Okay, and my follow-up to that is, say that notation isn't applicable for a certain course, but you see yourself engaging in community service, like along the lines of those courses or applying what you learn, can you maybe apply, I don't know, to the registrar's office or something to get it approved for that notation? If you plan on engaging.
I think what you could do potentially if you're doing a long-term engagement would be a commit to a Cardinal commitment, declare a Cardinal commitment with that organization, and then you can certify and get that same sort of accreditation for your work, just through a different venue through the Haas Center. So that would be what I would say with that. Another note is that if you do over 12 units of Cardinal courses, like Chloe mentioned earlier, you're able to apply for a Cardinal service transcript notation. which also shows up at the top of your transcript. Yeah. I don't know if anyone else also wants to add anything.
Just really quickly, because you asked a great question about how you can find those Cardinal courses. We have a Haas Center website, which lists all the opportunities for Cardinal service. And it'll show you all of the Cardinal quarter opportunities available, as well as the Cardinal courses available for that quarter and the Cardinal commitment opportunities. So that's also a great way if you want to add a course, Cardinal course for that quarter and you don't know where to look. That's a great place to start as well.
I'm gonna link that actually in the chat because there's a great search function. So you could do that for Cardinal courses and then also for like a Cardinal quarter if you wanted to. So I'll link that right now.
Great, thanks everyone. I see a lot of questions. I think for now, I'm gonna keep a running list. So Erica asked a question in the chat and then I'm gonna go to Shreya and then Annie. So Erica's question is, can you give some examples of what students have done for their Cardinal quarters? Yeah, does anyone want to start off with this? I think we all can give some pretty different examples.
I can go quickly because I did two different ones. One was prearranged and one was self-design. So the summer after my freshman year, I did the Cardinal quarter. It unfortunately no longer exists, but it's called Project Dosti, and I worked with a feminist organization in Andhra Pradesh, India. And then last summer, I did the Human Rights and International Justice Fellowship to work with the Business and Human Rights Resource Center in the Columbia office, and that was virtual because of the pandemic. But there's a lot of different options. I don't know if anyone wants to share their experience too.
I can hop in with, so I've also done 2 Cardinal quarters. I'm actually currently on a Cardinal quarter right now. You can do a good thing to know is you can do a Cardinal quarter at any time of the year. So there's specific fellowships for, non-summer fellowships, and you can apply for those as well. So I did my freshman summer, I was working with Engineers for a Sustainable World, which is a Cardinal commitment organization on campus, which I'm actually one of the co-presidents for, and we do projects based around community-based projects in engineering. And my project, I was working with a community organization in the Andes Mountains in Peru. I was working on basically a project that looked into sustainable structural conservation and working with the Peruvian Ministry of Culture to promote cultural conservation on a UNESCO heritage site up in the Andes Mountains. And so that was pretty neat. We worked with a team of students. We also were working with a partner organization there. Right now, I'm actually on a Cardinal quarter working for the Environmental Protection Agency, so a lot different. And I'm working on a project that looks into green infrastructure assessment and using basically a means of sustainability indicators to assess project success for environmental conservation in the long run. So that's what my current work is. So you can see there's like a pretty wide variety of things that you can be doing with these fellowships. Great, so for the sake of time, I'm gonna move us on to the next question, which I believe Shreya was next. If Shreya, you wanna ask your question?
Yeah, first off, thank you guys for giving us so much opportunity to ask questions and telling us about the center. I'm currently running a nonprofit, which has a really heavy service and educational focus, and I'm interested in continuing it at Stanford. And I was wondering what sort of resources the Haas Center might have for helping me in that journey and also to help me potentially grow my impact with it.
I guess I can hop in on this one really quick and say that I think my first piece of advice would be to come to peer advising at the Haas Center, which would be to have a personal, like one-on-one conversation with one of us to talk more about like the specific issue area that your work is focused on, and also where, you know, the place-based relationships that you have, and thinking critically about the ways that Haas can best support that with that contextual information, because I think those sort of details would be the first place we'd start in our conversation. Sorry, that's a little bit vague, but I think that would be the first thing I would say.
And to sort of also answer a question from the chat, if you want to kind of transform it into a club structure as well, the Office of Student Engagement allows for students to apply to introduce new clubs at Stanford. I'm currently like on that committee, and so we like review the application of all the students and their orgs and the kind of service that would be offered, especially if it's something that no other Stanford organization really addresses. Then I think that's also a really great opportunity if you want to garner a lot of support from Stanford students, but that's only if that is what you imagine, as opposed to just continuing the work generally.
Great. I think our next question is Annie, if you want to ask your question.
I'm wondering what the timeline looks like for applying to a Cardinal quarter. I know Chloe mentioned that we can apply for freshman after summer, or the summer after freshman year. And when would the deadline look like for that application?
I can answer that. Yeah, it's great that you're asking about that, because I think that's one thing that people don't realize freshman year. You start to get used to the cycle after being in school for a while, but usually it's in February is when the applications are due, with a lot of them are around the same time that it's due, but there's some variance. And then there's also some things like Stanford and government has like second round, which you would be later on for, but it's usually recommended to apply earlier if possible. Just because then you kind of have like a better shot of getting the funding that you want, but it's not off the table. So that's usually the timeline. It was a little different this year just because of the pandemic, but it usually falls in February. So keep an eye out for that. People usually start to like apply and think about these things in December. What I will say though is, since the majority of the placement or the grants and stipends for Cardinal Quarter you would be pre-arranging it, keep in mind that a lot of public service internships don't have their formal applications open until usually after that deadline, to be honest, for the summer. And so it's worth noting to like maybe start sending emails a little bit earlier to places and let them know that you're applying for separate funding, you'd be coming in with your own funding, and that you would be doing this work for them full time for the summer without them having to pay you. So that usually kind of is good to keep in mind. I didn't know that coming in, so I did a pre-arranged one. I think I said pre-arranged at one point, but I meant self-arranged. But yeah.
Great. I think that we have a couple of questions that I think maybe have been partially or fully answered. Shuba's question, I think Gabby maybe got to. And I think that also goes hand in hand with Hannah's question. Hannah's asking, what are different public service clubs? Could you please share about your experiences with these clubs? Does anyone want to take that on?
I can talk a bit
Tosh, go
about,
ahead.
oh, sorry, Gabby. Sorry, I was just gonna say, I can talk a bit about Partners in Public Health, which is a club that I was in, and that kind of goes a little bit to a question I saw in the chat about pre-med opportunities, but I was pre-med for a while, and in Partners in Public Health, we met with leaders in public health, looking at different crises. So one talk was from somebody who worked in the Ebola crisis. I'm sure they've had many talks now on COVID, and looking at ways in which we can improve our kind of fight for public health globally and in our communities as well. While I'm just talking about some of the pre-med opportunities, I can also mention Cardinal Free Clinics, which is a club at Stanford, or a Cardinal commitment at Stanford, that allows you to volunteer in hospitals. So that gives you kind of shadowing experience, a bit of hospital experience, which is helpful for pre-med students. And it's also a volunteer opportunity as well.
Yeah, I was just also going to mention that there are a lot of like organizations on Stanford at Stanford generally. Like, hopefully, if you guys are in person, you'll kind of be able to experience the terror that is the club fair at the very beginning of fall quarter. It's just a bunch of really overenthusiastic club representatives at tables across White Plaza. And so you can like learn a little bit more about like the various organizations open there. But I think that like there's a lot of, I don't know if there's any like public service clubs that are necessarily categorized, because you can engage in public service work throughout like a lot of different organizations. And like my personal experience, I think the things that I've been most involved in are probably Stanford Women in Law, which Chloe actually founded, and is super cool. A great opportunity for gender marginalized people who are interested in pursuing a legal career, or like generally interested in that kind of stuff, can really engage in that community, and also engage in public service work. But also I'm in student government, which isn't like a club formally, but also like allows you to advocate for student issues and things like that. And so like there's a broad variety of ways that you can engage in public service through student organizations.
I'll just highlight a couple more questions that are in the chat, and then I'll get to your question, Luke. So it's a few questions that have been asked are, what kind of support does the Haas Center provide for each of the career pathways outlined? I think Tosh touched on this, but would you mind giving us a little bit more information about the opportunities for pre-med students at Haas, and how was Cardinal service different from what you were expecting coming in?
I can add on to the pre-med questions. So as well as Cardinal Free Clinics and Scope and some of the sexual health resources, kind of opportunities there are for engagement, there's also the research aspect. So a big part about being pre-med is getting research opportunities, typically in the summer. And you can find community engaged learning and research opportunities with faculty at Stanford. The Alzheimer's Research Center and the Cancer Center are two that come to my mind. But I think that is really one of the strong suits at Haas, and as well as Cardinal Quarters that apply, where you can do research internationally, even as a doctor. And I think the great thing about that is that oftentimes research opportunities for pre-med students are unpaid, and with things like Cardinal Quarter, you can kind of find paid opportunities where you're still doing research, which you need to get into med school, and also working in public service, which is kind of your values. So that's been my experience as a pre-med.
I can talk a little bit about how Cardinal service was different from what I expected coming in. I can say that in high school, I had a pretty limited understanding of what I understood of as service, and I also didn't really know about the breadth of different ways in which you can engage in service. And so coming to Stanford, I think what was really shocking is just how much support there was to get students involved in public service, and then also how many cool things and how many organizations were really already there. And I think that's an important note too, is like, sometimes you won't find exactly what you're looking for at Stanford, but that's kind of rare. Like there's a very large number of organizations at Stanford. And I think it's even hard to know how many different things are going on at once. And so the number of ways to tap in to service and the number of ways to get involved are just like you can't even count them. I'd say there's just a lot of really neat things to do. And so, I mean, my advice to myself at your point, I would definitely recommend taking some time to just try to learn about everything that's going on before trying to jump the gun too much, because there's so many things going on. And it's really neat to learn from a lot of different people who've been in this space for a little longer. And that's really neat.
Yeah, I think everyone has covered really awesome ways to like get involved, and I think in addition to what has been mentioned, I think some of really great infrastructure that the Haas Center offers are things like Cardinal courses and Cardinal commitments, like we mentioned, especially huge emphasis on Cardinal courses because they're offered like in like departments from CS to comparative studies in race and ethnicity to like earth systems and like so many different ways for you to explore service interests and get involved with community organizations in a really structured way, especially if you're not completely sure what you want to do. There's also things like the service dorm. I'm pretty sure moving forward it's going to be in Otero, and I think that you can apply after your freshman year to live there, but that also has a lot of really great programming. And I think generally just like walking into the Haas Center and being able to like the staff there is really friendly. I'm sure you could like stop people or stop like peer advisors that are there and just like ask questions if you have any. I think generally like everyone that works at the Haas Center wants to help support you on your service journey, and so definitely don't feel afraid to like ask at the very not bare minimum, but like just at the beginning, like just definitely ask questions.
Yeah, and I think the last, I just want to make sure that we do touch on Maya's question, which was around career pathways support. I can say that I've gotten, as an engineering student in public service, I've gotten a lot of different opportunities, both for connections to mentorship programs, as well as Engineers for a Sustainable World, which is a Cardinal Commitment organization, is a great way to start and get involved in community-based project work. So, and I think I'll pass it to Chloe to talk a little bit about Gardner and some post-grad opportunities too.
Yeah, so I would say that it's not too early to start thinking about how to get involved with Cardinal Careers. For one, being subscribed to the newsletter. I think all of the newsletters through the Haas Center are very useful. You only get like one email a week, and it's all in like a digest format. And the Cardinal Careers one is really great if you're interested in looking at internships, fellowships, jobs, or anything. Specifically through the Haas Center, though, what's offered is there's two things actually that I want to point out. So one, Gabby had mentioned the Truman Scholarship, which I would really recommend thinking about if you're interested. It's an opportunity to get $30,000 for grad school, and it's a national scholarship, so you would enter a great network of people, and it's all for people who want to be public servants for the rest of their lives. And that you would be applying for junior year, and you would do that through Cardinal Careers. In terms of fellowships, though, that's a really great way to get into public service right after your graduation. And so, for example, I applied to the Gardner Fellowship and the Ford Fellowship, and I received the Gardner Fellowship. And that is an opportunity to work for 10 months with funding from the Gardner Fellowship Association. So you can basically go on with your own salary, and the Ford Fellowship works the same way, except for it's in philanthropy instead of with Gardner, where it's just any public service organization or government sector. And it's an opportunity to go in your own funding and kind of carve your own path right after graduation in what you want to do. People use it to go work at the Senate or the UN or like an organization that you really admire and want to work with. So the options are really open. And then there's also a number of community, I think they're called community impact fellowships. Gabby, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong because you probably know best. Community impact fellowships where you can work with an organization that Stanford has some sort of connection with, and it's a similar format, except for you know exactly what your placement is if you receive it, and instead of you setting it up yourself, and you would also be getting paid through that. So it's a really nice way to go straight into public service after graduation, a little bit of job security too with it. You'd maybe find out a little faster than if you were to be applying while you graduate. Which is kind of how it works for a lot of people in public service, as opposed to someone going into kind of the more corporate side of the job field, because you would be applying in like the fall or something. But I don't know if that's covered enough, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them. It's also early on to think about senior year stuff, but it doesn't hurt. So yeah.
Great, thanks so much, Chloe. I'll pass it to Luke to ask his question. Sorry for the wait, Luke.
Oh, no worries. It's just great presentation, by the way, guys. I guess I know that a lot of you guys started like your own organizations and stuff, and I know you suggested like that peer review, I guess application process, whatever. And I was just wondering if you guys would mind talking a little bit about your own experience with that, and kind of how you guys got the inspiration to start your own organizations, maybe like when that happened at your time at Stanford, stuff like that.
I'll pass this one to Chloe to get started.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, it was me and my freshman roommate. We both were pre-law, and there are a lot of organizations on campus that are Stanford Women in blank. So like medicine, one really big one is business. The list goes on, and I kept looking around and was like, why is there not a women in law one? Because there are so many pre-law women, but there are a lot of equity issues in terms of how women are able to participate in the legal field. And so we wanted to basically create an organization that would support women that and just gender marginalized groups in general in pursuing that, and have it also be in like a very supportive environment, have people be able to like dedicate their time to projects that they cared about in that vein, and also have it support using their future legal training to invest in equity and justice. And so that's how we ended up doing that. And then at the end of freshman year, we started applying for like the voluntary student organization status, which is what Gabby had talked about in terms of you need to submit an application and you got to go through this process. So we weren't approved until winter. So the earlier you start, probably the better, but also don't rush it because you can get your application rejected. Most of the time though, it's like you have a much better chance of having it approved if, like Gabby said, it's an organization that's filling a need, doesn't exist on campus. And so we had a pretty easy time like getting through once it was happened, or once we submitted it, because it didn't exist. So that's kind of where we went with it.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that as well and say the group that I was one of the co-founders for was the Engineering and Equity Group. And this was specifically for in the civil engineering department, we're a student group of a committee just working on equity issues related to the department. And we noticed that there wasn't that sort of voluntary student organization funding behind our work. And so we partnered with some other departmental equity groups in the engineering department to start that group. And it's that same sort of process that Chloe talked about. And again, I'd say, you know, sometimes in high school there can be a push to, you know, start your own org or feel a pressure to do that. I'd say there's a lot of orgs at Stanford already. And so the only reason really you need to go through that sort of process to apply is if it's not already there. And I think that, again, I'd say that that's kind of rare. But, you know, it definitely comes up. It came up in multiple cases. So it's definitely a important question for sure. Great. So now I think the next question that I'm seeing in the chat was, could you please describe the resources and mentorship to help with turning a public service project into a nonprofit? And then I'll also highlight Allison and Shreya's questions of, can you name some majors that are especially popular with students who are interested in studying philanthropy, service, nonprofit, social impact, etc.? And would you be able to talk about social entrepreneurship at Stanford?
I services, turning a public service project into a nonprofit. I don't have a nonprofit, but some of my very good friends started a nonprofit, Bridging Tech at Stanford, donating technology to youth, and that's also like a mentorship program. And I know that they have worked hand in hand with the Haas Center to learn about opportunities for new nonprofits, and getting the word out there about their nonprofit. I think one thing in particular that I would plug is the Public Service Leadership Program, especially if you're in that fledgling state of brainstorming and try to figure out what it's like to run a nonprofit, what kind of things you need for service leadership. I was in the Public Service Leadership Program my freshman year, and since then it's kind of been revamped, but it's a way to learn about how to engage in ethical service, how to become a service leader, how to get people to commit to your organization and work with community partners. Most useful parts of the program for me was the mentorship opportunity. So they connected you with a Haas staff member whose goals and passions aligned with yours, and who I am still very close with to this day. And so I think if you're someone who is looking to take your engagement with service to their level, and find ways to connect service to a nonprofit or to kind of a larger decision outside of Stanford, Public Service Leadership Program might be for you.
Thanks, Tosh. I guess I can hop in a little bit to talk about Allison's question. And I'd say that getting involved in social impact or service, you can study all sorts of things, and also that goes for nonprofits or philanthropy or any sort of discipline. So I'd say, I wouldn't say there's like one particular major, but I would focus in on an issue area that you're really interested in, or if you don't know, try out a lot of things, because there's a lot of great programs, there's a lot of great ways to start, and there's really just no wrong way to get started, other than, you know, siloing yourself a little bit. So I would definitely check out, or just come into peer advising. We can talk about like all sorts of your interests and like what sorts of things you get excited about, what types of things you don't like. And that's really why we're here. I think those conversations can be really useful. I can say from my experience, that was something that I went into peer advising my first week at Stanford, and ended up becoming close friends with both of my peer advisors that I talked to. And they both were super helpful in getting me started. And I ended up sticking with a lot of the stuff that we talked about. And so I'd say that's a great way to start. If you're worried about your major too, like we're here, we can talk about that. Other folks can talk about that. There's a lot of support resources. And I think the best way to really get that sort of mentorship and guidance is to, put yourself out there and go into one of these spaces in which we are actively offering advice and guidance. So, always ask questions, and folks are always willing to, give their insight, and that might not necessarily be what is best for you, but it will point you in the right direction in some ways, or change your pathway a little bit. So that would be my advice.
Definitely 100% second everything that Adam said. I know that there are philanthropy Cardinal Quarter opportunities as well as the Ford Fellowship, and for both of those, you don't need a particular academic background to really be able to break into that field. And so, again, I would say definitely encourage you to just study what you're passionate about, especially if you do hope to work in philanthropy or service in those fields specifically. And Stanford has like such a wide variety of classes that I think you'll really be able to hone like your passions into your academic planning, and be prepared for anything that you may need to apply for, anything like that. But I mean, I guess like specific majors, I think that might provide like good background would be maybe like I mean, anything writing heavy, things like econ or management sciences and engineering, which is technically an engineering degree, but it's kind of combines finance and technology and things like that. I think that also is a nod to like social entrepreneurship, if that's something you're interested in. And to turn to Shreya's question, I think the major thing that comes to my mind is SENSA, which I cannot remember exactly what that stands for right now, but I know it is the social entrepreneurship or main like social entrepreneurship club that's on campus. They also have Cardinal Quarter opportunities for students to be involved in that kind of thing. Like one of my close friends worked at Data for Black Lives last summer. And so a broad variety of really cool organizations that focus on social impact specifically. Yes, that is what it stands for. But also I know that in other ways that you can get involved with entrepreneurship is that the Haas Center has like these SEER fellows, I want to say, or something like that. So they bring in people who work in social impact, yes, every year. And so you can get to know a lot more about them and the work that they do within their community work. So yeah, I think if anyone else has anything to add on in regards to that vein, please feel free to stop me. But that's all I have.
We are running up on time here, so I am just going to highlight a couple more questions that are in the chat as we wrap up. And those are, first, what advice would you give for navigating through Cardinal commitment, as there are a lot of opportunities available? I'm interested in volunteering for Cardinal for free clinics as an interpreter, but is that limited solely to pre-med students? If not, is there a language test we must take? And I think Tosh touched on that a little bit. And then I would appreciate it if you would talk a little bit more about paid research. Do we submit an application for them? I guess I can touch on the first question, which was around navigating a Cardinal commitment. I'd say a couple of things. You can go into the Cardinal commitment office and have an advising appointment specifically with either Pete, Alex, or Kelly, and they all will know the ins and outs of everything and give you great advice. I also did that my freshman year. A good place to start would be probably, again, like coming to peer advising and talking to one of our peer advisors, because we can get you started at least. And then also you can make multiple Cardinal commitments. I currently have 2 Cardinal commitments that are up and running. And also, I don't know if we already mentioned this, but it's at least 3/4 of service, so you can do more than that for sure. So it's not limited in any way. So you can end your commitment whenever. but yeah, I'd say that those would be my first pieces of advice.
I can touch on some of the research opportunities. So I guess maybe there's 2 or maybe 3 categories of research at Stanford. There's one, just research with a professor, which I have done quite a bit of, and that you're kind of compensated for through course credit. And then there are also research grants at Stanford, which you do apply for. There are small grants for part-time research and larger grants for full-time research that you can do over the summer. Chapelugee is one that just came to my mind. And some of those are, like I said, smaller grants, and then other ones are kind of equivalent to the Cardinal Quarter opportunity. Cardinal Quarter is, we mentioned that already, but there are also some research opportunities that you can do via Cardinal Quarter. And so those are just really quickly some of the ways to engage in research.
I was also just going to add that there's a couple departments across Stanford that have like summer research programs. There's like the IR International Relations and Political Science. I should not abbreviate this yet for you all. But there's that. Actually, there's a ton to do with like public service and a lot of those topics too. So, and not just in that department, but across departments as well. I think there might be some with like sociology and urban studies as well that I'm more familiar with, but also with like engineering. I'm sure that there are like Earth Systems, I think does as well. But yeah, it's a good way to do it. Also, there are ways to be supported, not necessarily financially, but through like cohort style things. If you were to do an honors thesis your senior year, or if you're doing like a capstone project that was related to public service, you can also do that, but it's not necessarily a financial assistance type program.
Yeah, and depending on your interest area, there's also ways to get compensated during the year in lieu of course credit. I was part of a program that does that and gives stipended grants to students in research. So definitely, if you're interested in that and you have a specific interest area, there's a lot of resources to point you in the right direction. And again, like lots of folks who can provide more insight once you have that sort of interest area.
Yeah, I think I mean, like looking at my email from the past hour, I've seen like 1 or 2 research assistant opportunities pop in as well. So definitely like just throughout like the variety of mailing lists, you'll eventually be signed up to that flood your inbox every day. There are definitely also research opportunities that come through there. And then I also saw in the chat that Chloe mentioned the Emerson Fellowship, which has been redesigned to be called like the Dialogue to Action project fellowship thing that I'm doing this year. Forgive me for not knowing the name, but it's just for sophomores who are really passionate about social justice. And so you can, it's a two-quarter program that can be extended. So the first quarter, you just learn a lot about various social justice like facets of social justice and things like that. A lot more academic based. And then in spring quarter, which is where we are now, you start your capstone or fellowship project, and it can extend beyond. Like mine is definitely going to be, unfortunately, it's a little bit more complicated than I was expecting. And literally just as I'm talking right now, another research opportunity like came into my inbox. So I promise you, they will definitely, you can definitely have access to them. But to turn back to the Dialogue to Action program, I think it's a really great opportunity, especially if you are passionate about social justice, to like just find community with others like-minded students and really learn a lot about it, and also like have a positive impact on Stanford and or broader community.
Great, well, thanks everyone. I think that we're running up on time here, but Reza has put a couple more resources in the chat. You can follow us on Instagram at Cardinal Service. And feel free to follow up with us individually if you have follow-up questions. Thanks so much for coming.